So we know that Jane was referred for the purpose of a practice administration. And what we did with her is I administered the WIAT, which is the Wechsler Individual Achievement Test, and it's in its third revision. And what the WIAT does is we use it to be able to get a sense of where a student is performing academically. In Jane's case, we looked at mathematics, writing, and reading. And it's a commonly used achievement test. It's normed on a large sample of children. So that way, and it's a national sample, so that way we can get a sense of where she's not only performing, but how she's performing compared to same age peers.
Okay.
Now, the WIAT is composed of different subtests. So as I go over those scores, I'm going to show you where she's performing compared to same age peers on the normal curve.
Okay.
How familiar are you with the normal curve?
Sort of.
Well, it can be used to describe a lot of different patterns of data. For example, we'll use the example of grades. The majority of your kids are going to perform in this area right here, and they're going to be getting, well, C average.
Okay.
And they're performing one standard deviation above and below the mean.
Okay.
So then even less students are going to be getting B's and D's, and they're performing 2 standard deviations away from the mean.
Okay.
And then even fewer students than that are going to be getting A's and F's.
Okay.
Which are 3 standard deviations below the mean. But for this test, because the standard deviation and mean varies depending on what you're measuring. For the WIAT, the mean is 100, and the standard deviations are 15 points.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start with the reading subtest. She completed the reading comprehension subtest, and the way that worked is Jane read, I think, 3 stories, and she chose to read them silently, and then I asked her questions about the story immediately afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
She got a score of 123, which is right here in the above average range.
Okay.
2 standard deviations above the mean.
Okay.
The next reading subtest was word reading. And how that works is Jane was given a card with a bunch of different words, and they got more difficult as it went on. And she was scored based on how accurately she pronounced the words and how quickly. She got a 117 on that subtest, which is in the low end of the above average range, 2 standard deviations above the mean.
Okay.
Now for pseudo word decoding, it's done the same way as word reading. However, they're given a card with nonsense words, but they're asked to read them as if they were real words.
Okay.
For that, she got a score of 114, which you can see here is in the high end of the average range, 1 standard deviation above the mean.
Okay.
Now for oral reading fluency, which was her last reading subtest, Jane was given 2 passages to read, and she had to read those out loud. And she was also asked a comprehension question at the end. She wasn't scored on that. She was only scored based on any errors she made while reading. But as a side note, she did get the comprehension questions right, even though she wasn't scored on it. For that subtest, she ended up getting a 96, which is right in this area, right here. And you can see that that's in the average range, 1 standard deviation below the mean.
Okay.
Now onto the math subtest. Excuse me. Jane, for math, she was given the math problem solving subtest. And for that subtest, she was given a word problem or some sort of scenario verbally, and she also had a visual that she could look at to help solve the problem.
Okay.
So then she had to give me her answer after she figured it out. And she got a score of 100, which is right there at the mean in the average range.
Okay.
Now for numerical operations, that was a little different as far as Jane kind of worked by herself. We gave her this response booklet. You can see there's all the problems that she completed. And then she just went through and completed what she could.
Okay.
And on that subtest, she ended up getting a 95, which you can see is right there in average range, 1 standard deviation below the mean.
Okay.
Now onto the writing subtest. She had to complete one called sentence composition, and it's made up of 2 parts. The first part was sentence combination, or sentence combining, and you can see here where she was given 2 or more sentences, and she had to take those and then combine them into one sentence using the same information. And then the second part of sentence composition was sentence building. And this is a little bit different because Jane's actually given a target word, and what she had to do was create an original sentence using that target word.
Okay.
And on both of these sections, she was graded or scored based on how the grammar she used and the mechanics and stuff like that. So on that subtest, she ends up getting 103, which you can see is right there in average range, one standard deviation above the mean.
Okay.
Now for essay composition, this is another writing subtest, and that's what her essay right there. And Jane was given 10 minutes to write freely about her favorite game, and then she was supposed to provide 3 reasons why it was her favorite game. And she was scored based on her introduction, her conclusion, the actual reasons that she gave, any transitions she used, any elaborations. And we found that her subtest score in essay composition was 89, which is right here in the low end of the average range, 1 standard deviation below the mean.
Okay.
And then the last writing subtest is spelling, and it's just your average spelling task. What I did is I verbally provided Jane with a word, used it in a sentence, and then repeated it, and she was asked to write down the spelling down here.
Okay.
She ended up getting a 119 on that, which is right there in the low end of the above average range, 2 standard deviations above the mean.
Okay, great.
So do you have any questions about her subtest performances or anything we talked about?
No, not yet.
No.
Yet.
Questions are welcome, so. All right, so now that we've gone over the subtest scores, I'm going to talk about another type of score that's generated by the WIAT, and that's the composite scores. For example, there's a total reading composite, which consists of her performance on the subtest, reading comprehension, word reading, pseudo-word decoding, and oral reading fluency. So after all those were taken into account, she got a score of 116, which is in the low end of the above average range.
Okay.
And then there's also a basic reading composite, which is consisted of her performance in word reading and pseudo-word decoding. And she got a 117 on that, which is also in the above average range.
Okay.
And then the last reading composite is reading comprehension and fluency, which comes from, well, reading comprehension and then oral reading fluency. And she got a 112, which you can see is right there in the high end of the average range.
Okay.
And then written expression is the only composite for the writing subtest, and so that consists of the essay composition, sentence composition, and then spelling. And she got 104, which is right there in the average range.
Okay.
And then the last composite is the mathematics, and that consists of the 2 math subtests she got, so math problem solving and numerical operations. And she got a 97, which is right there in the average range.
Great.
Now, based on her composite scores at least, for example, her total reading composite and her basic reading composite were both in the above average range. So that tells us that we can expect Jane to perform at grade level or above. And she'll be able to understand and read information very easily.
Okay.
And then for the other 3 composites, so mathematics, written expression, and reading comprehension and fluency, those were still all in the average range, which tells us that we can expect her to perform consistently with peers.
Okay.
So does that sound like Jane's performance normally? Like, does that sound like her?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Do you have any questions for me then?
I do, yes.
Okay.
So based on these test results, do you think she'll be able to go to college?
Well, basically, at this point, we don't know that any of the 12-year-old kids in her grade are going to go to college. There's so much that goes into deciding if a student's going to go into college. But if that's something that you and Jane end up thinking about and talking about and thinking that that's something you want to look into, I don't see whether there's any reason to talk about that down the road.
Okay, great. Since she's so bad with the essay composition, do you think we should pay for tutoring?
Well, I mean, she did get, her lowest grade was an essay composition at 89. However, that's still in the average range. So, and since it's in the average range, she's expected to perform consistently with peers. So it's not really pressing for her to get tutoring. However, if it's something that's still concerning to you or Jane, and there's something that you worry about, you can always come talk to me and we can look into different options and talk about that.
Okay. All right. I just have one more question.
Okay.
When I ask her to do homework, she often refuses. So you're telling me based on this test that she can do the work?
Based on this test, mind you, this is just one piece of evidence.
Okay.
All of her scores are average or above average. So based on this test, yes, she was scoring in a way where we can expect her to perform consistently with peers and that which she can do the work.
Okay. So what do you recommend?
Well, I would have to have a lot more information before I make any recommendations on how to help her do her homework, simply because I would have to see if there's any particular reason that she's refusing, what does homework time look like. So I would need all that to make an actual recommendation on that.
Okay. All right. Well, I think the teacher has some questions.
All right.
Oh, yes. Yes, I have some questions. So how does this test relate to the math that Jane participated in?
Well, both the WIAT and the MAP are both instruments used to try and assess a student's academic achievement.
Okay.
That being said, any instrument that's used to measure academic achievement is going to differ in some way. For example, the WIAT is used, it's individually administered one-on-one, but if you get the MAP, it's done online and we use on like a lot more people, a lot more children, sorry. And they could differ based on the academic areas they look at. So even though they do differ a little bit, they still have the same goal of trying to assess a student's academic strengths and weaknesses.
Okay. So you're saying that Jane performed in the average range in writing skills. This doesn't make any sense because she cannot produce a well-written piece. This test has no relation to the core content in our expectations.
Okay. Well, the WIAT is based on a national sample of students. So it's not Jane being compared to the students in her class or the students even in her school. So there could be some variation because of that, because of the coursework and then what the test asked her to do. But I also want to stress that this is just one piece of evidence. We also do want to still look into her actual coursework and why there may be a difference between the two.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's all the questions I
Okay.
have.
Well, if you have any more questions, feel free to call, email, come in, and we'll get this taken care of.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.